Someone asked me why they haven't sent out the Amber Alert yet. Is it because they didn't meet the criteria?
So that question was answered very extensively, about 4 or 5 days in a row. I can have the California Highway Patrol elaborate on that if you can. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. As late as August 15, almost 10 days into Kiely Rodni's disappearance, the question came up for the fourth or fifth time in a row, why wasn't an Amber Alert issued? The reporter qualified the question by softly asking, is it because they don't meet the criteria? The question came up about halfway through the press conference on the 15th, around about the 7-minute mark, and the press officer appears slightly peeved by the question and says,
is it because they didn't meet the criteria?
So that question was answered very extensively, about 4 or 5 days in a row. I can have the California Highway Patrol elaborate on that if you can. Thank you.
So what's really interesting here is the issue of the Amber Alert is answered by the CHP, the California Highway Patrol, not by the FBI or a detective or the Nevada County Sheriff. We'll deal with CHP's answer in a moment, but to be clear, there are 4 criteria that need to be met in order for an Amber Alert to be issued. Number 1, law enforcement must confirm that an abduction has taken place. 2, the child must be at risk of serious injury or death. 3, there must be sufficient descriptive information of child, captor, or the captor's vehicle to issue an alert. Number 4, the child must be under 17 years of age. How many of those criteria did Kiely Rodni meet? I don't think it takes rocket science to see that by August 15th, and this was 6 days before AWP found Kiely, Ali didn't believe an abduction had been confirmed, but more important was the third criteria. There was no indication that there was a suspect, let alone a description of a suspect. Now, the interesting thing is that tow truck guy spoke to law enforcement a week after Kiely went missing, which is right about where we are right here in the timeline, about the 15th of August. If Ali took tow truck guy's statement and felt that there was confirmation that an abduction had taken place, or if they'd seen footage from the tow truck guy's dash cam and felt there was a reason to believe that they'd found a suspect, they would have announced an Amber Alert. So why didn't they? They didn't on the 15th, or on the 16th, or 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, or the 21st. That alone clearly shows Ali didn't feel that it had ever been confirmed that Kiely was abducted, nor that there was a suspect based on tow truck guy or anyone else for that matter. It also reveals that Ali, as late as 1 week into the incident, seemed to be leaning towards it being an accident. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is that law enforcement, and certainly TCRS, that's my channel, seem to consider abduction as an outside chance. Right up until when Kiely was found, we thought it was possible. And then when AWP found Kiely and found her where and how she was found, this seemed to provide confirmation to us, to Ali, to TCRS, that it was likely an accident. That was how I saw it. It's interesting that AWP and virtually the entire true crime community covering this saw it the opposite way, thought it was suspicious, and started looking for suspects. In other words, everyone was confronted with exactly the same set of information, and one group saw it one way, while another chose to see it in another way. So the 8th clue we all missed is to do with the Amber Alert and the reason it wasn't issued. And it's because the Kiely Rodni case clearly didn't meet that criteria. The criteria that the foul players see just wasn't there, according to those who needed to set up the Amber Alert.
When one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Since then, since we've had those off notes. We've seen at least one of those speculation suspects was obviously cleared because he had something as obvious as an alibi, right? That's a reference to Jagger Westfall, where he was actually in the news to say he has an alibi, and law enforcement confirmed that. He was a speculation suspect. But you'll see there are channels right now, up until right now, still trying to investigate suspects because they believe they know better than Ali.
When one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Now let's listen to the CHP officer's response to why an Amber Alert was not issued, and this is from August 15.
Sergeant Strecker with the California Highway Patrol and Truckee, and essentially, yes, there's very detailed and specific criteria for Amber Alerts. And as much as we might want to get that information out, the specifications on what has to be met in order to make that wasn't there. We, I think, collectively agree that the big social media push and whatnot that we've had has certainly reached a tremendous amount of people. So I personally feel very comfortable that our outreach in that capacity has accomplished what we could have accomplished with the Amber Alert. And certainly if things do change and that criteria changes, we would again apply for it and see if that'll happen from Sacramento.
If you're interested in this topic, there's a very interesting episode explaining how one false note does destroy the symphony. It's an analogy to what we're talking about here. It's an off note in an epic written in 1510 that led to the biggest mapping mistake of all time. And how did it start? Well, it started with bias. People already had that bias in them, and so that then informed all of their thinking that followed. I'll put a link to a great YouTube video in the description, and that really explicates that whole thing, illustrates it really, really well. So just to give you the idea briefly, there was a story out there written by a Spanish poet about an island called Calafia, populated by only women that was overflowing with gold. This myth was basically 16th century social media, and the printing press, which is quite new at the time, spread it through an epic novel that sailors read. So sailors would sort of be sitting, and also the captains would be sitting on these ships as they were crossing the Atlantic, and there would be a lot of time passing. And what do you do? Well, maybe you're going to read this epic novel. And so the sailors of that period were programmed to look for this island. And when they found California, they had insufficient evidence. That they found something that they thought looked like what they had in mind. But remember, this was 500 years ago. They couldn't fly over it. No maps existed. But on the approach from the south, California did look like an island. It was this peninsula jutting out with a lot of ocean, between the continent and the peninsula. And because everyone wanted it to be the fantasy island, they decided it was. When another dude called Fray Antonio came along and he said, guys, this is definitely the island. Even though it had been confirmed by that stage that it wasn't, that the peninsula at the top connected to the continent, it had actually been confirmed. Well, when Fray Antonio said that, all the sailors believed him. And Fray Antonio had some influence. For 200 years, they drew California as an island as a result of what Fray Antonio said. And this was despite other map makers and more experienced guys telling them, bro, it's not an island. So you had even the official map maker of Spain intervening and saying, no, it's not an island. But no one wanted to listen. They wanted it to be true, and they wanted to be told it was true. And Fray Antonio was doing exactly that. Although Fray Antonio feels a little like AWP, the difference is that AWP knew exactly what they were doing. They had experience in this area before. So in a sense, it's nothing like that. And law enforcement thinking this was an accident is nothing like the mapmaker of Spain trying to bring everyone back to reality. Now, Johnny Harris's video, as I say, I'll put a link in the description. It's really worth watching, especially from 13 minutes onward. It deals with this idea of ignoring reality in the name of a big dream. The crazy part is how long the dream persists even after the reality has been asserted. And why does this happen? Well, because people want to believe what people want to believe. And just like those sailors wanted this island full of women and all the gold that was there, that's what they were looking for, that's what they wanted. On YouTube, the big dream that creators are running after is something similar. They also want the treasure. They want true crime treasure. And true crime treasure is really a big audience that believes something. And so you simply just tell them what they want to believe. So they've got to convince their flocks that something is still buried out there, like buried treasure, and they can find the answer, and they've got a map to that buried treasure. And so what if that map's not really real? You know, they're not really going to find out. We're still looking for the buried treasure. It's all very exciting, and it works. But it also teaches, this whole game teaches people how to believe in wishful thinking, how not to be evidence-based or fact-based, how to use a certain amount of truth in constructing a deception. So it is teaching people to believe in wishful thinking and just enough to, perpetuate something rather than how to discern reality. That's what my channel's all about, asking the question, what is real here? Now, when I last looked, I thought true crime was about trying to figure out what was real, not trying to make the things you wished were real, real. It's about telling the difference between what's true and what isn't, not trying to make the truth and something that's not quite true or almost true or possibly true interchangeable. True crime is supposed to provide true maps, not titillate us with false ones or send us down the wrong path. So I think the reason the Kiely Rodni case never met the standard of an Amber Alert was because as far as Ali were concerned, no suspect ever emerged. And you can't have foul play in the conventional sense without a suspect. That's the 8th clue we all missed. You can't have foul play without a suspect unless you really, really want one. I'm curious, when the report does come out, how long will the narrative that California is an island in the symbolic sense here continue? Will the foul play narrative continue despite that report for 200 years? Or will people admit their error and reset their thinking maps? Believing in fairy tales is easy. Giving them up, admitting you've made a mistake, turning your back on the potential loot you can get from continuing down that road. If you admit you've made a mistake, you're kind of admitting you wasted everyone's time and that you were wrong. That's hard. Living in a world without fairy tale islands filled with women and gold is hard as well, because it means there's no jackpot offering relief to the effort that most of us must put in to make a living. But the hardest part of all is living in a world where the stuff you're led to believe doesn't actually exist anyway, where the wool is pulled over your eyes for years. That's harder still. You don't realize it's hard until you've lived for years and years and things have been very strange and things just don't happen. Living in a dream world and never quite waking up and being effective in your own life, that is in a way living a nightmare, pursuing something that never existed to begin with. And it feels like people are being encouraged and led like lambs to the slaughter in that respect. They're being asked to give up critical thinking and their psychology to think for themselves, to be weak-minded. And that shouldn't be what true crime is all about. True crime should be about being smart, being intelligent, following clues, getting the facts, and being a strong thinker and someone able to solve and investigate in a clever way like Sherlock Holmes, not in a dumb way where you're going down dead ends and rabbit holes that never ever get you anywhere. So if you take one thing out of this video, and I do recommend you watch the video I put in the description, it's really worth watching. If you take one thing out of it, it's this.
When one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.